right. All right. Is that working? Did you guys get messages? Yes. Okay. All right. So, welcome. It's good to have you all here. Um, it's going to be quick, like I said, an hour. So, I am probably going to go fast. And as I'm looking at my screen, I should welcome you to my messy studio. I would like to say that it's not normally messy, but it's always messy. There's a method to the madness, as I'm sure any of you who have studios will attest. Um, but it is what it is. I was like, I'm not going to try to hide it. So that's just one section of the messiness behind me. I am super excited that y'all are here. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to try this out and see how this whole online teaching thing works, or if it can work for me. I have just a couple of housekeeping things. Like I said earlier, I'm probably going to go fast, in part just because of the time, and in part just because there's several things I'd like for you to see, and I just think it's better to get a little bit more in than not enough in. But that doesn't mean that I'm not willing to stop and answer questions. So, if I'm going too fast, or if you miss something, or if you just can't understand what it is I'm trying to show you, for sure, unmute and ask me a question. Or if you don't feel great about that, put it in the chat. And if other people are willing to kind of monitor that chat and jump in and ask those questions, that would be great. It's going to be hard for me to keep track of the chat and be making these things, but either of those options are great if you have questions. And I was gonna introduce all the tools and supplies like one by one at first, but I just think with the camera situation the way it is, it's probably better to just talk about the tools as I use them. There's not that many tools, and so I'm just gonna walk you through each one as I begin to use it. Yeah, that's my housekeeping intro. Do you all have any questions before I just jump in and start hammering? No? Okay. All right. I just want to double check that I've actually got these videos pinned. Yes, because they won't record otherwise. Awesome. Okay, so I have about 6 variations of things I want to teach you, and I'm going to try to go from most basic and simple through to a little bit more advanced using other, materials other than what I use all the time, which is tin. So the first thing I was going to show you is this, I wonder if I could just see this. Just a simple rivet on flat surfaces, again with tin for me, but any 2 flat pieces that you want to rivet together with just one rivet, which usually means in the center, because otherwise one rivet just won't hold something in place if it's gonna swing or sway or anything. So these pieces are finished already. That's, it's anybody that makes, that's a simple rule. You want your pieces finished before you start riveting them, because you can't do anything to the edge of this centerpiece once it's riveted. You won't be able to reach it. So make sure all your pieces are finished to the way you want them first, which I have done here. The next key piece of riveting is having holes in your material that you're trying to rivet together. I generally use really small holes. I use this hole punch a lot. I don't know the exact name of it, but I love it because it has actual gauge, wire gauge markings, and all the holes are specific to that gauge. So this is, I don't know if you can see it. This is 18, 16, 14, and 12. Wire gauges the wire gets bigger as the number gets smaller. I don't know who designed that system. It makes me crazy, but that's the way it works. So I'm usually using the 18 gauge, which is really tiny. So for this today, I've tried to scooch everything up to the 16 gauge, which I also happen to have on hand, that wire. So you're going to see me use this second hole punch quite a bit. If you're using 16 gauge wire, the other thing that works for hole punching pretty well are these little hole punch pliers that you can get at you can get them on Amazon, you can get them, at a jewelry supply place. This is a 1.5 millimeter, and it's just a little bit bigger than a 16 gauge, so it's not perfect, but it's super close enough. And as far as punching goes, it's way more straightforward. I like these long jaws because it gives you a bit more, like if you have a big piece of material, it gives you more, you can get in deeper, right? You can't, like some of them are short jawed and you can only get around to the edge. So this gives you about an inch, I guess, in, which I prefer. So that I think they come in 1.5 and 1.25 hole size. 1.25 is close to the 18 gauge and 1.5 is close to the 16 gauge. Just FYI. I probably won't be using this too much, but I want you to know about it. So I'm going back to this guy. I'm going to punch both of these together, which means I'm going to hold them in position just while I'm punching them. That isn't always comfortable for people, so you can always punch one hole and then mark the center, and I'll show you that in a minute. Mark where you want to punch the other piece and then punch that piece as well. I've done this a bajillion times, so I'm pretty confident that I can hold the two pieces where I want them and then punch the circle. So what I'm doing is kind of just eyeing where the center is, which is kind of my MO. I'm not a good measurer. I just don't really get too caught up on perfect centering, but if you do, you should mark your center first and make sure you know where that is. I've hand tightened this little nut so that these pieces are staying in position, and then I'm just going to kind of hold them with my thumb while I use the Allen wrench to twist through the metal, and it will punch both of those holes. And this hole punch punches really perfect holes, which is really nice. Unless you're doing more layers of material. If you're doing more than 2 layers, I really recommend only punching holes for 2 layers at a time. That third layer, the hole it just gets funky for riveting. It gets too big. I'm not sure exactly what happens, but that's the case. All right, so I have these 2 holes. And here is, I'm going to set those aside. And this is the 16 gauge wire that I'm using. And you can use any wire. I use what they call German silver or nickel silver because A, it's silver colored, B, it's more rigid than straight silver, C, it's cheaper. So, and it's not precious, and I don't want a whole lot of precious stuff in my work, so it works better for me. You can use copper, you can use brass, you can use steel, you can use any wire that you want. The only thing I would say and I'll show you a little bit of copper wire in a minute, when you're using softer wire like that, you want to take a rawhide mallet and harden that metal and straighten it. I mean, it doesn't have to be straight, but using a rawhide mallet will stiffen that metal a bit, which is something you really want if you're riveting, because you don't want too much flexibility in your rivet. You want it to be as rigid as it can be, especially if you're doing more layers or some of the other things I might show you here in a minute. So I have my German silver 16 gauge wire. My technique is I make half rivets first. And so I have this pair of, I think they're called linesman pliers. It's just a Home Depot thing or Lowe's or whatever. What I like about them is, I don't know if you can see, they have serrated jaws. And so they tend to hold this smaller wire really snug so it doesn't want to slip through the jaws. So I use those serrated spots essentially to just throw a piece of wire in there. And what I'm doing is just getting like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters above the top of the jaws. I don't know if you can see that. It's just a teeny tiny bit. And I'm using the length of this plier to hold the very back end so that I can get some really strong torque up here without exerting a lot of hand strength. It's one of the things I like about this pair of pliers is that it has that length for you to be able to use that feature. Are you guys not seeing? Are you guys not seeing what I'm working on? I just want to make sure I see some stuff in the chat. Is everything going okay? Okay. Jump on and tell me if it's not, because I don't want to keep going if you can't see.
If you click on her phone,
I can't hear.
then,
wait, let's see. Maybe it's me. Can I not hear?
can you hear me?
Yes, now I can, Erin. What was
Okay. If you click on, I don't know if anyone's having problems. If you click on Christine's phone and just on the 3 dots and then click pin, that makes you what you're doing big.
Thank you. I should have said that. I will have to remember to say that in the next.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, so I've got just a millimeter or two above the level of these jaws. I don't know if you can see on my pen. I do this so much. My bench pen has been all kind of pushed down here. I do this all the time. I'm resting my. Hold on. I'm resting the jaws on the bench pen, and I'm using a chasing hammer, which, if you don't have a chasing hammer, you can use a ball peen hammer. Either will work. And my light just went out for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Sorry. It was bound to happen, right? Let me just see, plug it in over here. Try that. Okay. All right, and I'm gonna mute everyone again. I'm just gonna mute you, but you guys can jump back in. All right, so back to a couple millimeters above, using my chasing hammer. What I'm doing is just tapping lightly around the edge of that piece of wire. This is probably more than it needs to be, but I don't use 16 gauge all the time. And again, I don't know if you can see, but there's just less material there now because the material has domed out and spread out the way I want it to for this to create this edge on the as a rivet. And so sometimes if I'm not 100% sure, I will raise up a little bit more material and turn the wire about 90 degrees and then just tap it a little bit more just to make sure that I have a good little edge around the whole piece essentially. And so you're not going to probably be able to see this. And I can barely see it, quite frankly. It's something I do by touch. I always kind of run my finger up the wire, like right here isn't actually, there's not really a catch on that edge. So I'm going to just put it back in real quick. Oops, sorry.
Christine?
Yeah.
I think we can see better than you think we can.
Really?
I think so, because I can see pretty well.
Yay, that's good news.
I know we were talking about it at the last class, so I just want to tell you that.
Yeah, no, that's super great. That makes me feel way better because I don't know, it didn't seem like I was worried that it just wasn't going to be enough visual information, but that's good. So I'm glad you can see more. So again, running my finger, I can feel that little lip is there all the way around it. So this is what I do all the time. Like I will make a bunch of these, what I call half rivets, and I'll just have them sitting, waiting on my bench. Because the way I was not taught to rivet, but the way I saw through books and stuff to rivet, it wasn't quite like this, and it just seemed harder. It's just like, why wouldn't I just make half the rivet and then finish off the other half? So this is why I do it this way. It's not particularly traditional. If you went to a jeweler school, they probably wouldn't teach you this in this way, but it's working for me, so I'm going to keep at it. So once you've got this half rivet, then you have options on whether you want to place it down through your material so that you're riveting on the back side of something, assuming you have a backside. Not everything does. Sometimes you have things that are reversible. It doesn't really matter in this case. Both pieces are flat. Your only concern might be if you have a finish on something that's really delicate, hammering from the front side might be putting dents or stuff in it. If you miss hit a little bit, that's a consideration. But otherwise, it doesn't matter in this particular circumstance. So you have that over. I don't normally do this, but I've been teaching this in my talisman classes, and it seems to be working pretty well for people. This part is really important. Cutting the wire so that you have just a little, like just a millimeter or two of material left to rivet is really important. And when you first start, it's tricky to get the right amount of material. So somewhere along the line, I heard people talking about using a credit card as the guide for the depth of material that you would want. But for me, for tin, it's almost too much. If you're using silver or copper in your work, a credit card might be a perfect amount, a perfect width, but it isn't for me. So here I'm going to use just a piece of scrap tin. My recommendation is whatever material you're using, you pick a piece of your scrap material and you replicate this technique using your material. I have a hole punched in one end. You could also use just a little V shape cutout. Either works. This hole works really well because it doesn't move around. So I'm sliding the hole over this material that I want to rivet, and this allows me to take my flush cutters. These are flush cutters. They're going to cut a nice flat piece of wire, which is what you want when you're riveting. I'm going to take my flush cutters and I'm literally pushing down all this material as snugly as I can against my work surface and cutting, and I'm going to hold on to this because these pieces of wire tend to fly. So I'm snipping that off, and then there's just the teeny tiniest, literally it's like a millimeter of I can't pick it up because it's going to fall through, but it's just a tiny little bit of material. And it's the same technique for the backside. I'm just going to hold my material snug against the surface, and I'm going to tap all around. This I might turn so that I'm making sure that I'm getting around all these edges. And you'll see that the material is doing that little mushrooming thing. Sometimes if you're feeling like you're not sure it's super secure, you can flip it back over, work on this side a little bit, and you can go back and forth as much as you want there. And that, the one test for when I'm doing a center rivet is to check and see if these center pieces are moving. If they're moving still, it means that your rivet probably isn't tight enough. Unless you want movement, which you can rivet something so that it's secure but not actually tight. So it may be a design consideration that you use that. This right now is tight, and so it's, in my opinion, done. And that's it. Like, that is the whole technique of riveting. There's no real magic beyond that. But I am going to show you a couple other things that just work off this one same technique. So the next thing I was thinking might be useful to know is if you're working on bigger pieces, if you have something that you need multiple connections, then same thing, you're gonna want to punch holes, but you're only going to want to punch your first holes and set your first rivet. Don't ever punch a bunch of holes because you cannot guarantee that once things are riveted that all those holes are going to align. So I'm just going to run through this quickly, the same thing. I'm using the wrong gauge because I'm so used to using the small one. I'm just going to punch a hole on each end of these two pieces. I've got a bunch of half rivets. Does anybody want me to show you more of the riveting using the linesman pliers? Are you guys clear on that? Do you want to see more of it? Are you good? You can just hop in and let me know one way or the other. If not, I'm just going to use some half rivets and just show you quickly the process. So that rivet's already been made. I'm not going to use the gauge because I'm pretty comfortable cutting the right amount of material. Same thing, just gonna tap. Oh, one of the things I noticed yesterday, if you're a tool user, you already know this, but if you don't use a lot of tools, make sure you use your hammers. Hold your hammers further back on the handle and let the tool do the work. Let that hammer fall on your material. Don't get up here trying to tap 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 at it. It doesn't really work that way. You really want the material, you want the hammer to just be able to use its own weight essentially to help you do the work. And so that one is set. And so now that I have that one set, now I can go and set the second one. And then from there, if you have like 14 rivets you want to do, once you have 2 rivets set, you can then punch all of the other holes because then they will align. So that's fine. But always punch your punch and set your first 2 rivets. And then from there, you're good to move on to multiple hole making if that works for your workflow process. Same thing, just punch in the hole. I'm gonna snag another half rivet. And the other, always be sure that you're pressing your flush cutters to the work surface, because if you get too much play in there, then you're not going to get the right amount of material, and that's gonna mess up your. Actually, that's a really good idea. Hold on, I should show you what happens when you have too much material. I'll do that real quickly. All right, so those 2 are secure, they're set, and then I could punch 14 more holes in there if I wanted to. Let's see, now that I've said that, well, I'll show you that in a minute. All right, so here I have a couple of pieces where one piece is flat and one piece is slightly domed, has a little bit of form to it. And I'm just going to show you that quickly because it is actually trickier. If you want to form pieces and rivet them, you have to be real considerate. You have to really consider just the nature of the material, because there is some hammering involved. You can re-divot things in ways that you don't want. So let me just show you. This isn't super domed. It's not like I have a piece like this that's really been domed. It's really been formed. You can rivet those, that to something flat. The issue becomes that the depth of that dimension is almost 1/4 of an inch. That requires your rivet to be really rigid without any support in between. And so when you're hammering, it can sometimes get wonky in there. So it's not that you can't do it, and I'm not going to actually demonstrate it because it's just tricky, but it's just something to consider. Like, your rivet can't be so long, it can't be super long, and it has to have support with other material in order for it to be rigid and set correctly. So I'm just going to use this little slightly domed, slightly formed piece to show you a couple of things. One thing is, you saw me just put the rivet through the front, which would require me to rivet on this side. And so when you have things that are formed, you can see you've got some wonkiness here, right? It's probably not the right direction for me to set this rivet. If I really want this piece to be formed and these 2 pieces to be riveted together, I'm smarter to come in from the back on this one. And come on, piece, go through. I'm smarter to come in from the back on this one and rivet in this direction, because you can see that I've got really great stable contact here with this, unlike on the other side. So that's also a consideration when you're riveting, just making sure that your final riveting position is going to be 16 gauge wire, man. It's harder to cut. That you've got as much stability as possible on your work surface while you're riveting. And this is going to be a good example. This has got too much material. Really, this piece of wire is still too long, but I'm going to try to see, I'm just going to hammer it just to see what happens, to show you when you have too much material. It doesn't always go right. So I'm tapping it. Of course, it's kind of going right because I want it to go wrong. You know how that works. But it also leaves you, even if you do it right, it leaves you with a lot of material that you've got to, because you can see I've been tapping for quite a while, but this is still really loose, right? So in order to get it to be stable, I've got to do a lot more tapping, a lot more capably, because it's just not going to get snug, right? So that's one of the things that happens when you have too much material. You just can't really mushroom out enough material to put those two pieces together snugly. Now, also, like I said, it could be a design consideration. If you want this to have play, having slightly more material isn't a bad idea. So there is that. I'm not going to keep at this, but you get the point that you can rivet shaped and formed things as well as flat things. That was kind of my point on this particular one. Next thing, I was going to flip to another material, use a little copper for you, just to show you that you can use other materials. Something I do in my work a lot, I don't use copper, but I use steel, and I flatten out one end of the wire to allow me to have enough space to punch a hole in it, and so that I can then connect it to my tin pieces.
Christine?
Yeah.
Are there different hardnesses of steel wire?
You know, that's a good question. Most of the wire you're going to get is called like black annealed wire or something like that. And being annealed, it means it's fairly soft. So I'm not sure if you can buy different hardnesses of wire, actually. I know that the precious ones come in various hardnesses, but I don't know that steel gets sold that way. But again, using a rawhide mallet on it will harden it enough to make it useful. So same with copper.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm gonna just punch a hole in this pretty big piece of copper, which I wouldn't normally use. Just in part to show you that you don't have to always rivet, you know, whatever, sheet metal to sheet metal, you know, anything you can punch a hole in, you can ostensibly rivet to something else. So got this.
Christine, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
What gauge is that? It's copper that you normally use for steel. What gauge is that?
The steel that I use in my earrings, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So I will tell you up front, I do not recommend it. It's super crazy. I use 19 gauge steel wire, and it's not super easy to find. I actually had to go to a kind of a manufacturing, like a industrial manufacturing place to find it. 18 gauge is much more findable. You can get that, I think, even at Home Depot. And it's probably more sane to work with. But, you know, it's just the smaller you get, the tinier the holes get, the more fiddly everything gets. So I would say 18 gauge wire is probably the smallest you're going to want to go. And also, the smaller the wire, the less material you have to actually create these flattened areas. They just won't flatten out very much. So bigger wire gives you more flexibility on how big you can make these little flat areas. So I have that hole. I'm just going to punch another hole randomly. because I don't have a plan for this really. And then when I use this technique, I keep this wire connection in the back. It doesn't mean it has to be there. You could connect it in the front as well. And I've got a piece of copper wire here that I'm going to connect it with. And so I'm just going to, yeah, that was good. I had a piece of copper wire. Now I have a shorter piece of copper wire that I'm just going to, again, come in with my rawhide mallet and just make sure that it's as kind of as hardened as possible. I don't have a rivet head on this one, so I'm going to make one. You'll see if you work with copper, it's so much, softer that everything happens faster. It just wants to do that work so much more than the German silver that I work with. So I have a nice little head. It's got good edges and contact. I'm gonna go through the front on this again for the same reason when I showed you the dimensionality on the last piece. Same reason here, because I guess I shouldn't have put that rivet through, sorry. Because if I try to go from the bottom, from the back, and rivet this way, the wire itself becomes wonky and rocky, and it makes it difficult to get a good set on the rivet. So I want to be riveting from the back side on this one so that everything again is flat and not moving around. And so I tend to hold the wire itself because that allows me to hold the wire kind of holds the piece of sheet metal as well. So when I can come in, then I can come in with my flush cutters and cut just a little bit of material. Everything's holding in place. This wire serves as its own little handle essentially. And then I can come in and finish the rivet. And so when you use two materials that are the same color, it kind of blends kind of nicely. I never really thought about that. I use wire that's black for my pieces and then rivets that are silver. I don't know, maybe I should reconsider that. And this one, honestly, I don't really love what that front rivet looks like. So I'm just going to go in and tap at it a little bit more. When you do that, it can kind of can clean up the face of the rivet. So this is something to consider as you're making that. Make sure that you think all of the rivets look, as neat and tidy as you want them to, essentially. And so now I have this guy just, connected to a wire. I could also punch a hole in this end, connect it to an ear wire, connect it to another piece of material. It's just another form of connecting pieces. All right, how are we doing for time? Okay. Any questions at this point? Anything that you're not understanding? Anything that you want me to show you in particular? Like, is anybody working with a particular material that they're like, can you just show me that or talk to me about that?
Christine, could you
Yeah.
tell us again what the name is of that tool that you get the holes with all the different gauges in it?
That is an excellent question. I don't know. I think it's just a hole punch, but I didn't tell you at the beginning. I'm going to have a full handout that I'm going to email to each of you that will have links to the tools that I'm using so that you have that.
Thank you.
I think it's just called a hole punch. It's like Pepe Tools hole punch or something, but I don't know beyond that. There are several versions of this. Some have I like the one that has 4. There's some that have 3. Those work fine too. You just have to figure it out. But I will send you links. It may be a day or two because my mom's coming to town tomorrow and the house is a disaster area and I have 45 things I should do before that, but it will come to you in the next few days. Any other questions about materials or tools or anything? Okay. If so, just jump in. I have a couple last things I was going to show you that I just think are kind of interesting. Sometimes if you're working either as an assemblage person or if you're a found object person, like I found in my stash of things I'm holding on to for who knows why, apparently so that I can use them as a demonstration piece in a video one day. I have this kind of silly little fish that I don't know if it's bone or I don't know what the material is, but it's got dimension and it's one of those things that it seems to me that if you tried not too hard, you could actually break it. So I'm using it as an example of kind of a delicate thing that you can rivet, that you can connect through riveting. I'm going to use this piece of copper wire because it actually fits the holes that are already in this little button. I think it was a button originally. And I wanted to show you that the wire is all janky and it's all, it was sitting in a bin somewhere. So it needs to be straightened, which again, that's what this rawhide mallet is great for. So while you're straightening it, you're also hardening it. And so if, wire is great, you can, it can be all janky and you can fix it and make it usable again, which I really like. What I didn't do was find a piece of tin to rivet this fish to. So I'm just gonna real quick cut out a piece of material that's not finished. So don't do this. Finish your materials first. Pay no attention to the teacher. And I'm gonna punch one hole. This fish has 2 holes in it. I'm gonna punch my one hole first. I guess I should at least guesstimate where the hole should be. All right. I'm going to punch one hole first and then set that rivet and just show you that, you have some options on the kinds of materials that you rivet together. A piece of copper. Make a little half rivet. You'll see too, if you work with bigger wire, you'll have more material in the center of that wire to actually hammer out around the edges. The smaller your wire gets, you really just don't have that. You have to just make sure your edges do the work they need to do. But with bigger wire, you get a bit more material to work with, which can actually be a really useful thing. So again, this guy has dimensionality. He's going to wobble a little bit. So I'm going to come up from the bottom of the piece. Oh, I would come up to the bottom of the piece if this hole were the right size, but it is not. So I'm going to make a slightly bigger hole because I'm working with found. That wire is a piece of found wire. I don't even know what the gauge of it is. This thing is telling me it's closer to 14 gauge. So I'm going to come up through the back, make sure that that's snug. Again, traditionally, when people are talking to you about riveting, they tell you that this hole has to be super snug. That has not been my experience. It's close enough, seems to be fine with riveting. If your wire has a little bit of play inside that hole, it is not the end of the world. So just keep that in mind. If people are like, oh, it's too big, the hole's too big, I don't actually buy that. That's not been my experience. All right, and I'm gonna slide this little fish on top. This hole that that the fish had automatically is a little bit big, and so knowing that, I'm going to leave a bit more material when I cut this wire than I normally would in order to have enough material to actually make the rivet bigger than the hole that's already there. I hope that makes sense. That was a lot of words. So I'm not cutting this wire as close as I normally would. Although maybe I just did. we'll see. When you're working with a material that might be a little bit fragile, clearly having good control over your hammer can be key. You don't really want to pound too much on something that's breakable. But honestly, using this technique, I really feel like if you were good with your hammer and you were patient, you could hammer a piece of glass if you wanted to, if you could put a hole in the glass. That's the tricky part. Yeah, and so it's not super snug, in part because I haven't tightened it down as much as I could, but I'm not going to. I'm using it, just like I said, as an example to show you the range of what riveting as a technique can do for you. I'm not even going to set the second rivet because I think you get the idea. And then, oh, I have one last thing. As I was going through all my collection of junk, I found, I think this is like a watch piece, like a watch, like a men's watch band. It's like a part from a watch band. I have no idea why I have it. It's a weird thing that I would have, but it made me think that it was another example of ways you could use wire rivets. I have fixed many of my reader glasses that have broken off at the little hinge with rivets. You know, if you can find a piece of wire that fits through it, you can rivet it. Same thing here. You can create a little, you know, do a half rivet. This is tiny brass wire that I have right here. Tiny. But same technique. And you can thread through things. This, you know, that rivet's going to form a stop. And if you want, you could snip it off and rivet this as well. But I show you this because, like, this idea of being able to put rivets in this direction to allow for some sort of hook or eye connection, it's just another way of, it's another possibility, I guess, for how you might use rivets. So, yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting thing. I don't have any real, it's an odd, unusual way to use them, but I just want to plant a seed in your brain for other more unusual ways to use rivets. Yeah, there's that. All right, that's all I have in my bag of tricks. Who's got questions? That was actually got a lot more in than I thought we would. I was worried we would not get to all the things.
I
Yes.
have another question, Christine.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that the cut of your, like I don't know whether you can see the piece of sterling that I have here.
Yep.
And it's not like it's in a point. Does it have to be cut off flat?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And that's a good point. And I could see yours better. These flush cutters actually, the reason they're called flush cutters is that they do make a cut that's flush and flat. Okay. Again, a traditional jeweler would tell you that even after you cut your wire, you should come in with a file and file that flat. I am not that fiddly, and my flush cutters are perfectly fine. But what happens is, if you look at your flush cutters, there's a V shape in here, and so when you cut things flush, they cut flush on this side, but on this side they leave a V shape mark. And so you can just go back in, and I do this all the time, on a piece of wire that has that V shape. I just go back in with my flush cutters and just nip that little V off, and then it's perfectly flat again.
Okay.
Then you can just set your next rivet.
Thank you.
Yes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage you to try riveting with that little point. You'll find very quickly why you don't want to do that. Let's see. Is there anything in the chat that I'm missing? Yes, chasing hammer I'm using is super cheap, so all the tools I have are pretty much the cheap versions of them of the tool. Any other questions? We got plenty of time if you have any other thoughts or if you've had any other struggles.
Can I ask you a question that's not riveting related?
100%. This is a great time to ask those
I-
questions.
I'm dying to know how you get your circles so circular.
So any circle 1 inch or under, I punch with
Oh,
a circle punch like this.
oh, okay.
Any circles over an inch, do you work with tin or do you
No,
work with silver? Oh, okay.
I
So,
work with silver, but I'd like to expand things.
well, I highly recommend tin. I love it. Any circles over an inch, I use a circle template. And because I'm working with tin, I can, let me see if I can get close here. I can actually use an etching tool and etch against those templates. I don't know if you can you see that?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, right. And so I find, and I use Sharpies and stuff too, but I find that these etched lines are super nice to cut to, right? They're very clear. And so with circles, it's just, I cut as close as I can, keep on the outside, and then file back whatever isn't, working for me. But yeah, that's a key component. You can't cut into your circle, but you can always cut just a little bit outside of it and file it down. So
And do
yeah,
you
that's why.
use special wire cutters,
Do I use special wire cutters?
like to cut out the circle? The larger one that you have there?
Oh, yeah. No, I use kitchen shears.
Oh,
That's
wow.
yeah, this is a Joyce Chen kitchen shear. This is what I cut my tin with.
Yep.
Any Fiskars will work. Almost any good pair of scissors will work for tin at least. I don't know about other materials. Yeah, and I really like these actually because I don't know, they're small. They have a great ability to turn. The material is, I don't know, it's just a good tool. I really like them. Um, any other questions about riveting or otherwise? No? No questions? You're telling me I did such an amazing job. Everybody is 100% clear on how to make their own rivets. It's okay if you're not, because you can get in touch with me.
There's a
Great,
question
thank
on
you.
the chat.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Says, can you show us how to
Oh.
file the metal or tin smooth?
Can you show us how to file the metal? Yes. So like if I were to cut out this circle, which since we have it started, I will do that. Again, I'm pushing for tin. I tend to push the material kind of into the scissor blades as much as I am pushing my scissors through the metal itself. I'm doing what I should not do. When you cut out any material, you probably should just cut it out from the bigger piece, rather than trying to cut a circle from that big piece. So let me show you the correct way, even though I rarely do it the correct way. So I'm just following these lines, kind of following these lines, and just doing what I told you not to do, which was cutting inside the circle line. So there's a little bit of extra material. You can see, I don't know if you can see, but this edge is a little rough. So I use these, I think they're number 6. I think they're called pillar files. There's no filing along this there's no file grooves along this narrow edge, but there are on the flat faces. This is the file I use the most frequently. I tend to, let's see if I can get you closer here. When I'm filing, I work in my janky bench pin that has a lot of these little weird grooves in it so that I can shove this piece of tin up in there. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this or not, but I use this kind of just pushing motion to file the material off up to that etched line. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I'll do a little bit. So I have this arc that's pretty clean right through here. Once you have that, you then, with tin at least, you need to go and clean off at this kind of, I don't know, I guess this is probably a 25, 30-degree angle. I'm filing off. There's extra material that just gets caught up. And so I'm cleaning up that edge. So you have to file the whole way around, and then I find that you have to file that across thing as well to get the material off. That, of course, is a little bit fiddly. That's something I wouldn't recommend. If you're just playing around with tin, I would say go to my other tried and true method, which is a big old bunch of super fine steel wool, and then just rub the edge. See if I can find here. Do it this way. Just rub your rough edges along that steel wool, and you will get a 70% effect of what I get after having done a lot of filing. The steel wool really softens the edges a lot and makes them perfectly wearable and fine. What it won't do is make your circle perfect. You can only do that by filing. So yeah, does that answer the question? Somebody have any follow-up on that? You can hop on and speak if you want. Okay, I'm taking that answered the question. There's just a couple more minutes. Is there anything else that you would like to know, or anything I didn't cover that I should have? Happy to try to squeeze it in. No, seems like a very satisfied group of people. All right, then I will close things up. I will, like I said, figure out the whole recording thing. I will get that loaded up to wherever the heck I'm going to load it up to and send you a link. I think I'm going to make it available. I guess there's no reason not to make it available forever, but I would just say if you want to keep it, you probably should get it and download it if you really want to hold on to it. I don't have a long-term plan for that yet. And then, oh, the handouts. I will get the handouts together and make sure that you have a list of tools and supplies. And is there anything else other than tools and supplies? I guess I could do a little write-up of what my step-by-step riveting process is. I could do that as well. And so I'll send that too, in case that's useful. Other than that, I think we're done. I really appreciate y'all coming. Thank you for, again, being part of my inaugural trying to figure it out class.
No, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It's been wonderful listening to all the birds chirping in the background.
Oh, that's like the favorite part of my studio.
Yeah. We're still surrounded with snow, so it's a wonderful change.
Oh, it gives you a reminder that it's just around the corner for you too.
Absolutely.
I love that. All right. Y'all have a great afternoon. I really appreciate it.
You too.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.